Hello and welcome to this strategic analysis video for the August 2019 strategic case study on transport network company Zoom. And before we start, just a very brief introduction to the case, as for some of you this may be the first time you have really looked at the case study, but the transport network industry is the focus. And essentially, it's an organization a bit like Uber, a bit like Lyft, where you are booking a taxi cab on your phone, and then the driver picks it up on their phone and drives to you, picks you up, drops you off, and then goes back on the system. So essentially, a taxi cab hailing company, but it's all done through an application on your smartphone rather than the more traditional sense of a taxi cab service where you are hailing them from the roadside. But in addition to this, the company also has a separate part of the business where it has bicycles, and there's bicycles in particular locations where they're kept in docking stations and can be used for individuals to rent by purchasing them, or purchasing the rental at least from the docking station, cycling them around the city, and then putting them in another docking station. And this is very similar to the bikes that they have in London and that are commonly known as Boris bikes. So for a point of reference for you there, as they were brought in during Boris Johnson's administration as the Mayor of London. And Zoom is a large organization, one of the largest, or the second largest transport network company, or at least one that uses applications within the country of Jayland. It's second only to an organization known as Optim, which is the global market leader. And how we are going to analyze this case is using the rational model, a model that you may be familiar if you have studied your E3 paper recently. And essentially what this looks like is, well, as is on the screen, and it looks at where the organization currently is, using different internal analysis techniques, looking at the environment that it's in, be that the internal industry environment or the greater environment in which the business operates, using the Pestel analysis. Also look at where the organization ultimately wants to be. What is its mission? What are its objectives? And also look at the various different stakeholders, using your stakeholder mapping matrix, or also using the governance of the organization and the ethical and corporate social responsibility obligations and desires of the organization. And once we've done that, we'll then look at how we are going to get there, the business strategy. This is the bridge between the two, the bridge between the now and where we want to be, the various different methods of growth, the various different models that we can use to analyze how we are going to get from point A over here to point B on the right hand side. And we'll start this video by looking at where Zoom want to be, looking at their mission statement, looking at their objectives, their performance measurement, the various different governance and ethical requirements for the company, and where all the various different stakeholders of the organization that have been brought up throughout the pre-scene, where they fit in. And the first thing that we're going to look at is the organization's mission statement. Now, essentially, a mission statement is about what an organization is. Why does it exist? Who does it exist for? What is the organization ultimately trying to achieve? If we look at the pre-scene, the mission statement was to provide shared transport experiences that connect and bring people together. So transport and bringing people together are two of the big takeaways from that. And the model used to analyze the effectiveness of mission statements, or to assess how a good mission statement should look, was done using the Campbell model. And the Campbell model breaks down into 4 different areas, and these are the purpose, strategy, values, and principles of the policies of the organization. So let's look at each of these in turn. Purpose is why the organization exists. Who does it exist for? What does the organization want to achieve? So looking back at our mission statement for the organization, we say that the organization is hoping to bring people together. Ultimately, that is its purpose, to bring people together, to provide transport experiences. And the reason why I've broken it down is that so we can pick apart what they actually mean and also what that means for the organization in the future, rather than focusing purely on the mission statement in a holistic fashion. Look at it from a broken down point of view. Transport experiences. So when we are sitting our exam and we are looking at various different strategies that we've been presented with, we're looking at various different options for growth, we can look at whether this ultimately helps us to achieve that goal of providing transport experiences. If it's nothing to do with transport, if it's nothing to do with the experience of transport, then perhaps it's not something that we should be doing. If you think of your suitability, acceptability, feasibility model, it wouldn't be fulfilling the suitability because it's not tying in with what we ultimately want to achieve. Bringing people together as well. That doesn't necessarily just mean it's revolving around transport. So again, if there's something else that we can do that brings people together, be it through business operations, be it for the corporate social aspects of the part of the business, bringing people together is part of what we are trying to achieve. Then we look at the strategy. How the organization compete, the range of businesses in which it is operating within. This is not generally clear in the mission statement. There's not really anything about how we are going to compete, whether we're going to be a low-cost provider, whether we're going to be the best quality provider, whether we're going to compete in different markets. There's nothing like that. It doesn't even say around the world or in Jayland or anything like that. However, if we look at the vision statement, which in some ways we can take to be an extension of this vision statement, as it's a bit more of a comprehensive approach to analysing the existence for the business, says that we want to see a world where transportation and technology bring people together, where people are sharing experiences in a safer, cleaner, more connected way. So again, here's some of the takeaway here. What are we doing to compete? We want to provide something that is safer, something that is cleaner, and something that is more connected. And this somewhat ties in with the next section, which is the values. What does the organization stand for? Well, it stands for being safer, cleaner, and connected. And when you usually talk about values, you talk about things like, and I'll give you some examples here, of quality, value for money, innovation. These are how the organization stands apart from its competition. All of the competition exists to provide transport experiences. They all want to provide a safer, cleaner, connected way. They want to work within the Jayland market, etc. So the purpose and strategy can be very similar. The values is what perhaps sets the company apart. Does a competitive value being good value for money? Does a competitive value being the absolute most expensive, most glamorous company that sends limousines rather than cars, etc.? That's how they would market themselves. That's what they stand for. Whereas we look at Zoom and we can see that one thing that is clear from the vision statement is that they want to make life easier for everyone. And those of you who watched the pre-scene videos, and also those of you who have read through the pre-scene, will notice that there is a common theme of convenience running through the pre-scene, about making things more convenient. Everything's always about making things easier, more convenient, more user-friendly, the application systems, etc. So we can see here that one of the values that Zoom have is to make things more convenient. It's being convenient, being easy to use. And the final section relates to policies. Now, these are generally not prevalent in the purpose, strategy, and values, and they're generally not prevalent in the mission or vision statement. But they are policies that people within the organization are expected to follow in order to meet the values of the organization, in order to meet the strategy of the organization, in order to meet the purpose of the organization. So this could take the form of an induction document when a person joins the organization, be that an actual employee in the head office or be that a driver. In their induction pack, They need to essentially be educated on all the various different things that we have discussed here about bringing people together, transport experiences, being safer, being cleaner, being connected, being convenient, the ease of use of our systems, everything that makes Zoom Zoom. If we go against these things, if we are not cleaner, if we are not more convenient, if we aren't bringing people together, then we are not acting within the remit of our mission and vision statement of what Zoom is ultimately trying to achieve. So now that we have taken a look at ultimately what the organization is trying to achieve in terms of what it stands for, what its values are, we need to look at how we are going to measure how well we are doing with regards to meeting those objectives. And again, in the briefing, there was a summary of key performance measures. It looked at the revenue growth, it looked at the driver numbers, it looked at the ratings, etc. There were quite a few metrics and they were all increasing quite quickly. But the reason why I've brought up the balanced scorecard here is because it's one of the most famous, most prevalent models within the CIMA syllabus for performance measurement. And the reason why it's so good is because it doesn't just look at the finance. Now, obviously this is important, and that's why it is still 1/4 of the balanced scorecard model. But there are more things that go to making a business, particularly given that this is a quickly growing tech company where there isn't necessarily going to be profit. In fact, there's huge losses in the last year, so there hasn't been any profit. So if we just looked at the financial perspective, you might look at Zoom's statements and think, this company is absolutely terrible, it shouldn't exist, it should be closed down. So that's why it is important to look at these different measures. As we'll look at each of these in turn, we're looking at internal perspective. So this will be things like how well your organization is functioning internally, how satisfied your employees are in your head office, how much investment is being put into the organization, be that from the various different venture capitalists that are funding Zoom, or whether that is using profits, or not profits, but money generated to plug back into the business. Looking at the ways in which the organization operates as well. On-time job completion, job success rates. These relate to the various different jobs that the drivers do. How often are we on time to pick up the customer? How often do we drop off the customer at the time we said that they would drop them off? As in, they call us and we say that we'll be there at 5 o'clock and your journey is going to take 12 minutes. So how close to arriving at 12 minutes past 5 are they? If they are a couple minutes late, it may not be a big deal. If we're half an hour late and they missed whatever appointment they were supposed to be going for, if they were trying to catch a train, etc., then that's going to have a real negative impact on the organization. So looking at using all the various different computer systems that we have that monitor all of these things to analyze how effectively we are operating. Are we picking people up on time? Are we dropping them off on time? Then looking at the learning perspective as well, this is the often referred to as the growth measure. There were quite a few measures relating to this within the pre-scene, or some of the key performance indicators at least were somewhat relative to the learning and growth perspective, like the number of drivers that we have, like the number of rides that we've completed, the revenue growth, that would be financial, registered users, etc. These could all bridge the gap between internal and perspective. But generally, when we're thinking of learning and growth, we do look at things like innovations, tech innovations particularly, as this is a growing organization, or investment in not in the actual operations of the business like we have in the internal perspective, but investments in research and development. How much money they are putting into driverless cars, for example. Then we have the customer perspective. We have lots of different customers. In fact, we have millions and millions of users, over 10 million registered users according to the pre-scene. So the number of customers, but also the number of repeat customers. How many of these people sign up for our app, use us once, and never use us again? And we can do that is by looking at the number of customers we have, and also looking at the number of rides that we completed. If we look in the precinct, it says there's about 10 million signed up users and 180 million rides completed. So on average, a person is averaging 18 rides over the course of a year. Now, that doesn't mean that that's always going to be the case. There could be some people that never use us more than once, and there could be some people that use us every single day who are, of course, going to blow off that average. But it's still a useful metric for analyzing just how successful we are, or how we are retaining our customers. Another good indicator there is the number of complaints, but also the customer satisfaction. And this is very prevalent because we ask all customers for a review at the end of their ride. Not only after just using us for the first time or every 6 months, every single ride provides a feedback form with a satisfaction rating. And we can see, according to the precinct, there has been an increase in driver rating to 4.3 out of 5, up from 4.1 out of 5. So some good systems in place would be useful to really help measure how well Zoom is doing with regards to meeting its ultimate strategic objective. So the next section relates to governance. I'll briefly give you an overview of the theory of governance before going on to the specific parts related to the case. So essentially, governance is the way in which organizations are directed, administered, and controlled, with the aim of ensuring that the organization is run in a way that is right for all stakeholders. So essentially, ensuring that a business is run to benefit the stakeholders and society as a whole. So it sounds very good. And it's worth noting that this is only applicable to UK companies and listed companies at that, companies that trade on the stock exchange. But that's not to say that there aren't things that we can take from this and apply to any organization. It doesn't matter where that organization is based. Just as in our case, it's not based in the UK. And it doesn't even matter if the company isn't listed, because of course it's all about running the business in the best possible way. So just because you don't have to do it doesn't mean that you couldn't gain from it. Let's take a look at some of the few key factors from the Code of Governance. What is considered good governance? And that's having a separate chairman and CEO. Of course, the CEO is head of the organization, and the board is ahead of the CEO. And so the CEO runs the organization on behalf of the board, and then the chairman is the head of the board. So if you had a situation where the same person was the chairman and the CEO, they might be setting themselves targets they know they'll be able to achieve. So they're not pushing the company, trying to get the most out of the company, trying to achieve its potential. The chairman is just setting themselves easy targets that they know they'll be able to achieve so they can get their bonuses. Independent non-executive directors. These are people who are not employed by the organization. They sit on the board to, in a sense, act as the control for the executive directors, to ensure that the executive directors are running the organization in a way that is beneficial for stakeholders and not for themselves. This, of course, it goes some way to removing the issues caused with the agency problem. Now, agency problem is essentially where directors are running the organization on behalf of the shareholders. Now, the shareholders own the company, the directors don't, but the directors are in charge of the company. So the directors perhaps aren't necessarily interested in the long-term viability of the organization. They perhaps are more interested in their short-term gains. So they may leverage long-term sustainability, long-term growth for short successes, small successes, so that they can boost the share price of the organization, so that they can boost the dividends paid out to the shareholders and get their bonuses and move on. And so that's the point of the non-executive directors. Non-executive directors also need to be people who are skilled, knowledgeable, not just any old person. They need to know whether what the executive directors are doing is right or wrong, and they have to be firm as well. There's a tendency for independent NEDs to not rock the boat because they're paid quite a handsome stipend for doing it. It's only a few days a year job, and so a lot of them don't bother doing it, or don't bother sort of standing up, rocking the boat, where of course they have to. That is their job. And one of the main jobs for the NEDs is to sit on the Audit, Nomination and Remuneration Committees. Now, these are 3 different committees that, in a sense, are the essence of what governance is, ensuring that everything is done fairly and ethically. That's the Audit Committee, ensuring that executive directors are not using company funds to fund business trips and golf trips that the shareholders wouldn't approve of. For example, if an executive director is taking a client to Dubai for 2 weeks to discuss a business opportunity on the company's dime in a 5-star hotel, well, it could have just been a couple of hours meeting at the company's office. That would have been enough. Yet they chose to go on holiday for 2 weeks in a 5-star hotel. That's not an effective, efficient, correct use of company money, and that's the kind of thing that the Audit Committee is responsible for stopping. The Nomination Committee are in charge of selecting people to sit on the board, selecting the executive directors. And this is to ensure that the chairman or the CEO doesn't simply bring their son or their daughter or their husband or their wife on board to the company to earn extra money for the family, to give them an opportunity. No, it needs to be someone who is right for the job, someone who is experienced, someone who has knowledge in the industry, and generally someone who is not related to other members of the board, because this of course affects their independence, this affects their ability to think, and perhaps increase the chance of them being biased. And remuneration committees as well. These are the committee, this is the committee responsible for deciding the pay on the directors. And this is because directors' pay and the list of directors has to be disclosed to the public, and so of course it's important to come across with to come out with a fair level of payment. If the company that you work for is not doing so well, it made X million in losses and it's got to lay off employees, but then it's also found out that the director had a £40 million bonus this year, which was a 20% increase on last year's, then people are going to think, well, why? Why is that director getting a bonus, a raise, when the company has done worse this year than it did last year? The company didn't meet any of its targets. It was supposed to be trying to break even this year, and it made millions in losses, yet you've given the director a bigger bonus than you even did last year. That's the kind of thing that will really frustrate the public, turn the public against the organisation, turn the shareholders against the organisation, turn the other stakeholders, such as the employees, against the organisation. And that is what governance tries to overcome. It's also worth pointing out that governance has a risk management focus, particularly with regards to the Audit Committee. So the Audit Committee is often in charge of creating things like risk registers and other things like that ensure that risks are being dealt with. Because it's one thing to identify risks, it's another to actively go about mitigating the impact of those risks. And that's one of the values of corporate governance. Financial reporting and control, also very important, ensuring that all the statements are done as per the laws of the particular country in which the organisation operates in. Ensuring that directors have all the information they need, because of course they can't really be judged on their decision making if they aren't given the amount of information given. So this system is to ensure that all executive directors are provided with all the information that they need to facilitate good decision making. And with regards to decision making, that all directors are involved in it. And this means even if it means taking, something as simple as a show of hands, just ensuring that everyone is involved. Often, in certain situations, if you've got, say, founders of the company still sitting on the board, the founders are very powerful. Everyone agrees with what the founder says. And that's against governance. The whole point of a board is that there is a consensus amongst a group of people rather than one person making all the decisions. So if that isn't happening, if one person or two people or half the board are far too powerful, then that goes against the point of a board and thus against the point of good corporate governance. And regular meetings with both institutional shareholders and all shareholders at the annual general meeting. Institutional shareholders, of course, being things like your pension schemes and your big stakeholders, big shareholders like that. And it's important that we do this because of the fact that they have a lot of money invested within the organisation. If they were to take their money out of the organisation, it could cause a lot of problems with the market because the share price might drop, as people may be thinking that there's something wrong with the organisation or it's on the decline because this major institutional shareholder has decided to take their money out of it. So that is governance from a theoretical perspective. So now that we have discussed the general theory of governance, let's look at a few things that were noticed in the pre-scene. Now, first thing is that there is a code of governance. There is a Jalen code of governance that was specifically mentioned within the pre-scene. And when you see this, you should be thinking back to that UK code of governance because this is what they are usually based off of. And when you have this sort of situation, it suggests that there may be a situation in one of the exams where you need to analyze the governance of the organization. For example, if we were to launch on the stock market, which is a big contemporary issue, remember that there have been launches of major rideshare apps on the stock market like Uber in the last couple of months. So it's a huge contemporary issue, and that often shapes the kind of questions that come up in the exam. So if they were to launch on the stock market, they would then need to abide by the rules of the code of governance. And there's a few reasons why they currently don't do that. First thing, though, is that there is less potential, at least for the moment, for the agency problem to arise because the founders of the organization are still running the organization. It's their company. They're less likely to leverage the long-term growth of the company in favor of short-term returns when it is their organization because they don't want to see their company that they founded, that they put blood, sweat and tears into, to collapse simply because they wanted to make a quick profit. But even if they don't launch on the stock market, there are always things we could learn from the code of governance because it's supposed to be the way in which an organization is best run. So regardless of whether you are UK based or not, regardless of the fact of whether you are a public company or not, there is always something to learn. And one problem we have here is that the chair is not independent. The chairperson is supposed to be independent, but here we've got the same chief executive officer and chairperson. CIMA Khan is both, and this is not what the code of governance said. The chairperson should be independent of the organization, and you should have a balanced number of NEDs and executive directors. This brings wider experience to the board and allows them to check decisions. Another issue here is that despite the fact that she seems very, very qualified, is that we have a chief communications and marketing officer who happens to be the sister of the chief operating officer, who also happens to be one of the co-founders of the organization. Now, this is not against the law, as in if she is qualified for the job and she is the right person for the job, then by all means she can have the job. But there will be questions over nepotism should the company go public. And she'll need to prove that she is the right person for the job and not just there because they happen to be the sister of the Chief Operating Officer. And this goes the same for anyone. Any spouse, brother, father, etc. If they are there related to the owners of the company, there is always going to be that sort of question. And it's important to satisfy the various different stakeholders that that is not the case. They are there because they are the right person. Also, there was no mention of the Remuneration, Nomination, Audit Committees. There was a mention of a Risk Committee, however, which is very important. But the step above the Risk Committee is the Audit Committee. And the Audit Committee is responsible for the attitude towards risk management throughout the entire organization, rather than just specifically looking at certain risks, meeting to discuss certain risks at certain points. And particularly if they were to go public, it's very, very important that these 3 committees are staffed, filled, and they are staffed by, you've guessed it, non-executive directors, of which the company does not have enough to staff the committees with at the moment, and will need to bring more to the board. And the non-executive directors that they have, though, have been there, placed there as a result of the venture capitalists. And so that is, to be fair, a good thing that the venture capitalists of the organization are represented at board level. But there is still plenty that they could do to work on. For example, more non-executive directors, staffing the committees, having a separate chief executive officer and chairperson. All of these things will need to be considered if the company were to go public. And it's very likely that there will be a question where the company is looking to go public. It's a big contemporary issue. It was referenced throughout the pre-scene in terms of the need for funding because they've got so many grand plans, and also in previous pre-scenes where there's been a private company with a lot of venture capitalists invested in the company. The venture capitalists have tried to realize their investment by getting the company to go public. So it's a very likely issue to launch on the stock market. And as all the exams, the questions feed from each other, a likely second or third topic after a first question, which has been about launching on the stock market, is a question on governance. So it's a very likely exam issue here, and it's important that these things are discussed should it arise in your exam. So thank you for watching this video. I hope you have enjoyed it, and more importantly, you have found it useful. I'd like to finish by just telling you a few things about the products that we produce here at Astranti and the ones that are part of our course. So these materials can all be purchased as part of the course or purchased individually. So we have our study text. We have 3 study texts for all the objective test exams. So 3 study texts for E1, P1, F2, F3, etc. But we also have the study text specifically for the case study exams, split into 2 parts. The first is about how to approach the exam, how to analyze the information, how to plan your answers, how to write your answers, and also the second part, which looks at the key theories from the objective test levels that are relevant to the particular case study. So if you are looking at P2, F2, E2 for the management exam, F3, P3, E3 for the strategic case study exam, and so on. We have our course videos, which look at how to plan your answers, how to manage your time effectively. These are the key reasons why people fail the exam. We have our pre-scene analysis, which looks at the pre-scene in a lot of depth, applies key information to that, and also concludes with the strategic analysis, where we look at the various different models in the CIMA syllabus and apply them to the case, and also the top 10 most likely issues to arise in your exam. Generally, we have a 70 to 80% accuracy rate on our top 10 issues. Our industry pack, which details in great depth the history and the current contemporary issues within the particular industry that the pre-scene is based on. We also have 20 to 25 industry examples that you can use within your answers. We have mock exams that can be purchased with or without marking and feedback, where you can get some real exam practice in, look for the kinds of things that the examiner is going to bring up in the exam, and also get marking and feedback from expert markers who have marked for CIMA and for us for many years, who know exactly the kind of things that exactly the kinds of things that the examiner is looking for, exactly the kinds of mistakes that students often make, and can provide lots of detailed feedback to ensure that you improve on your performance. We also have our master classes, which are 2 day-long classes which look at all the key issues facing students in the exam. We will also go through live planning, showing you how to plan your answers effectively, how to write your answers effectively. Again, key things that cause people to fail the strategic case study exam, or any of the case study exams for that matter. And also, if you do sign up for our course, provided that you have filled out your forms, provided that you have submitted your mocks, provided you have done everything to show that you have really given it your all to try and pass this exam, we also offer a pass guarantee, giving a free resit to anyone who fails the exam.